Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. We all love our home water. It's the place we'd choose to fish first. It can be a refuge, somewhere to gather our thoughts, or to share with a friend. And sometimes we'll catch some fish too. My guest, like you, cares deeply about the river he fishes and has done much to protect it over the years. I'm looking forward to talking with him today about fishing and life in general. My guest is Dave Smith. Dave, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Pete, and thank you very much for inviting me along today. Looking forward to it.
You're most welcome. For our listeners, I know obviously lots about you and where you fish in your home water. Tell us a little bit about where you're based.
So I'm based on the Herefordshire-Gloucestershire border, sort of sandwiched somewhere between the Malvern Hills and the Forest of Dean, not far from the bottom of the M50, which means that in sort of fly fishing terms, my home waters, I'm not far from the River Wye, I'm not far from the River Usk, but the river that you know is most important to me is the River Monnow, which is a little over half an hour away from where I live.
Yeah. It sounds you've got where you live sorted out absolutely perfectly. And the Malverns is interesting to me as well. And we're going to come and talk about auctions a little bit later as well. But I remember in the Wild Trout Trust auction, I always try and search out interesting and different sort of places. And with Roger Smith, I got to fish some of those streams off the Malverns there. And that's pretty cool. Do you get to fish there too?
I have fished them. So we're talking about the Cradley Brook and the Lye Brook, the tributaries of the River Team on the Severn system. They're beautiful little streams, and they hold some nice surprises.
Yeah, absolutely. I fished it the first time with Roger, and I think it was mayfly time. And I was thinking, it's one of those ones where you've got, I don't know if you have similar when you're fishing, but I had somebody standing next to me, and you're always nervous when you see a fish rise and its first cast, and you think, please don't stuff it, please don't stuff it. I'm sure we've all been there. And thankfully, it was the most positive, wonderful rise I had, and that set the tone for that little stream. And it was absolutely wonderful. And they're fun streams to fish too, aren't they?
Yeah, they're great, you know, with a 6'6" 3-weight or something small. And you do need something small because there's a real canopy of undergrowth and trees that you need to sort of fight your way through at times. Lots of bow and arrow casting, but great fun, yeah. And you've reminded me, actually, I mean, I haven't fished either of those streams for probably 10 years, and really they're sort of 15 minutes away from where I live. But it tells you something about what it takes to drag me away from my home river, really.
And that's extraordinary, isn't it? Because with the Usk so clear, and we've seen this over the years, and, you know, somebody I'm sure who's fished it for many years as well, that has that sort of early season trout fishing, large dark olive hatches, the first place you can get your dry fly fix. Does that mean early season you'll circumnavigate that in early March to head to the Monnow?
No, I mean, the Usk and the Monnow are very different, and they will say that the Monnow is a later river, which it is. So the Usk will get going right from early March. You know, you'll see fish picking off LDOs in February. So March the 3rd is our opening day, and you can go with an expectation of finding rising fish on the Usk right from the get-go. Whereas the Monnow is quite different. And although it will look in fantastic shape, the kind of mythology locally is that it doesn't really fish, and it's not worth fishing until you see the first leaves come on the trees. So much as you want to go and fish it, and I do, much to my chagrin afterwards, because it will be tough. It's usually sort of mid to sort of late April before it starts to get going, and then in May it really does get going, and it will provide you with fantastic dry fly sport. If I tell you that, I suppose it would have been about 5 years ago, Lee Evans and I fished a beat on the Upper Monnow, and we saw the biggest hatch of LDOs we'd seen anywhere. It was late March, and there were thousands of these things carpeting carpeting the river, and there was not a fish to be seen. It was extraordinary. And you would think that there wasn't a fish in the river. And that's indeed how we came away feeling, something dreadful has happened here. And then 3 weeks later, same beat, and it was alive with fish. So it's a mercurial river, I think, is how I would describe it.
That's really interesting because I've sort of, my home river is very, very similar, and you get these sort of, as you say, there's no fish here. There's no fish. And I've gone to the stage now that I don't really bother a great deal until April time and when Granham come out. Does that mean for you that you will wait and till things wake up on the Monnow, or do you go and get a fix elsewhere?
Well, I'll do a bit of both, really. I mean, I'll go and get a fix on the Usk, because the Usk does have good early season hatches, the LDOs, and the March Browns have really come back now and are a proper thing once more, and that can be really exciting. But I think early season is a good time to just go and watch, go and look at the river. The Monnow's quite dynamic, particularly the upper half of the river, and the course will change slightly. Pools will have shifted, runs will have changed. So it's a good discipline sometimes, I think, to go and walk the river without the rod, see how it's changed, and do a bit of watching. So that I tend to do a combination of those things early season. And then the Monnow, once upon a time, we used to get a really strong Granham hatch. And I think the last time I experienced that would have been probably 2009, 2010. And they've not vanished, but it's not a hatch that you would go and fish now in the same way that you perhaps would on the Usk, where you get biblical numbers of them on a good day. And they just disappeared in numbers. And talking with those who know the river very well, people like Patrick Lloyd and Rob Denny, at the time, we kind of put it down to the spates. The Monnow does get huge spates, and there was a very strong spate that year, which could well have washed out a lot of the eggs and the pupa at a crucial time, and it's just not recovered.
Yeah, it's a great shame to hear those things. And I wonder sometimes that we talk about us being in a downward cycle. I wonder sometimes we get these sort of mini cycles within a cycle as well. And it will be interesting to see how these things play out. You have my utmost respect for walking a river without a rod in fishing season, because I don't know I could do that. I know there's a bit of ash that I've got to cut. And I was saying to somebody just the other day that I can't do it because I come down here and I want to fish and I end up fishing and completely forget about it. And I'm sort of kind of hoping that we get low water in October, and then perhaps I can go and do something about it. But can you describe the Monnow from a size point of view? You sort of alluded a little bit to it from a size point of view, and how it looks, and if it's tree lined, and you've touched on hatches a little bit, just so that you can paint a little bit of a picture for us and for the listeners.
Yeah, it's a river with huge character and changes a lot over its course. It rises just below Hay Bluff in the Brecon Beacons, or the Banai Bracainog, as we're to call them these days. And up there, it's very much a sort of quick flowing pocket water, riffle and pools, quite open with the occasional tree as it flows down in the shadow of Hatterell Hill on the edge of the Black Hill, and it will flow down through Longtown towards the A465, which runs between Hereford and Abergavenny. So there's a very definite clear valley where that part of the valley where it's dynamic, lots of meanders, and it shifts an awful lot. Small stream, you could jump across it in certain places, perhaps about 5 or 6 yards wide. And then the tributaries start to enter. as you get towards the 465, the Hondy and the River Dore, both of which are great little fisheries in their own right. They enter and it increases in size. And if you drive that road from Abergavenny to Hereford, you'll see this wonderful trout stream meandering and curving. You'll see the pools. And if you're a fly fisherman, you'll be slavering at what might live within. And then it changes character. Once it gets below the 465, it becomes a slightly bigger river, perhaps about sort of 10 to 12 yards across, 15 in places. And there, because of the geology, it changes in character. So you'll have some quite slow, lugubrious stretches, and then you'll have the other faster flowing traditional riffle and pools. And there's an awful lot of tree cover. So much of the middle to lower river is tree lined with steep banks. And, it cuts through a very sort of lush meadowland of farmland where I suppose what you feel aware of there is it always has a tinge of colour to it because, the spatey nature of the river, it's always eroding the silt and the sort of, the river itself becomes a little more sort of coloured down there, but nonetheless, it's still a great fishery. The interesting thing about the Monnow is it forms the border for Wales and England. So if you're fishing on the right-hand bank for much of its length, you're fishing in Wales. If you're fishing on the natural left-hand bank, you're fishing in Herefordshire. So, the place is steeped in history as well, which is one of the things that attracts me to it. There's a real sense of time and place there. There's the old ruined castles of Offa's Dyke. There's an old Knights Templar manor nearby. So, and it's away from, apart from that 465, which bisects it, most of the valley is completely away from any main roads. So it's utterly secluded and beautiful and peaceful. I remember the first time I arrived there and just sort of driving through sort of fairly featureless farmland, and then suddenly you go over the brow of a hill and round a corner, and this huge valley just opens up below you, and the river is there hidden in the tree line at the bottom. It's a very, very special place, Pete.
That sounds a wonderful description of it. And tell me, how did you find that then, having the other rivers so close or a little bit closer? How was it that you came across the Monnow? Because it seems to me that you're deeply passionate and love this stream so much that you've sort of used the other ones to fit in time when you can't fish the Monnow or the Monnow's not fishing. How did the Monnow come to you, or how did you come to the Monnow, I guess?
Yeah, it's a bit of a shaggy dog story, this one, Pete. So, I hope your listeners can endure this one. I came back to fly fishing in 2005 after a layoff of about, 10 to 15 years. And when I look back at it now, it seems extraordinary that I went that length of time without picking up a fly rod. And what happened was, in my day job at the time, I was a head teacher, primary school head teacher. And not borrowing your phrase here, but I ate, slept, drank, lived and breathed that job. It was I was hugely passionate about it. And then, I loved it. I was very, really cared about the profession and what I did. And then one day I woke up and tried to go to work and just felt absolutely empty, like someone had pulled the plug out. What am I going to do here? And I was really nonplussed. I just felt I hadn't got the energy to go to work. And what I did in the end, sort of mind over matter, drove out the house, drove towards the school. But in the end, I didn't drive into the school gates. I drove into the house next door where my vice chair of governors lived, a guy called Canon Tim Newcomb. Knocked on his door, and he said, "What are you doing here, Dave?" And I said, "I just need to come in and talk, Tim. I don't feel like I've got anything left to give. I'm on empty." And we sat and talked for a long time. And he said to me, I want you to do two things. He said, the first thing I want you to do is to go and see a doctor. And the second thing I want you to do is to fill your days with wonderful things. And then when you're healed, please will you come back to us? And I felt this huge sense of weight lifted from my shoulders. And the sad thing was, Pete, as I was driving away, I was thinking, what are the wonderful things that I'm going to fill my days with? I'd, lived for the job. But it coincided with a phone call from an old school friend. And he got in touch and said, did I fancy a day's fishing? Why not? I've got a lot of time to kill. And we went for a day on the Derbyshire Wye up on the Peacock Water. And as I walked the length of that river and was picking off fish, and there was a sense of, this is the wonderful thing. This is the wonderful thing that I can fill my days with, or one of them. Now, clearly I can't be driving up to Derbyshire from Ross-on-Wye every day, and I needed to find somewhere locally. So I joined the old fly fishing forum. Do you remember that back in the day? And,
yeah, absolutely.
And what a place that turned out to be. It connected me with the Monnow first and foremost. I just put a post up, and a guy called Paul King recognised where I lived and said, I'll send you a guest ticket to my club water on the River Monnow. Here's how to fish it. You'll be fishing for grayling this time of year, but here's how to fish it. You'll find the fish are average size of sort of £1.25, £1.50 each, and go and enjoy yourself. So I took up his offer, drove down to the River Monnow, that never even knew the place existed. And sure enough, there's this beautiful river, secluded, and I fished it for grayling. And exactly as he said, I caught fish after fish, and they were average size of £1.25, £1.50. I was in absolute heaven. But there was also a sort of connection, a feeling. It might sound a bit fey to say so, but a kind of almost a spiritual feeling about being in the river, and I could, feel that sense of healing for me that it would give me. So one of the main reasons the Monnow is so special to me is that at a very difficult time of my life, it provided me with a huge source of pleasure, something that helped me reconnect myself, reconnect with myself, really, refill my reservoirs. That's what Canon Tim told me to do. He said, you've drained your reservoirs, Dave. You need those wonderful days. And that's what fishing provides with me. And, and that's what the Monnow has given me. It's refilled my reservoirs. And the generosity and the kindness of the people that I met through the river. I've met some very, very good friends, made some firm friends through my fishing there. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionate about it, and why I enjoy showing other anglers the river, because it's a river that gives you those special moments, whether it's the big grayling or, as I say, big grayling, the £1.25, £1.50, the average size, but they grow to much bigger in there. But it's always had that ability to give you special moments. So yeah. That's my shaggy dog story about how I came to find the Monnow and why it's special to me.
That's beautiful, Dave. And I think, we live in a world where things can be so complicated, yet it doesn't have to be, does it? And if anything, taking away from fill your day with wonderful things is just about the perfect piece of advice I can think of. It's just wonderful, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it truly was life-changing advice. And I returned to my job. I sort of redesigned the way I did it, and I'm no longer a head teacher now. I gave that up about 8 years ago. I still work in education, but the river, and specifically the River Monnow, that's the place I go to switch off. from the stresses and strains of professional life, to reconnect with the important things to me, which is sense of place, sense of time, the natural world. And the Monnow has a wonderful natural history. There are otters, kingfishers, red kites, you see polecats, bird life is tremendous, wildflower meadows, curlews. There's so much of a sensory experience around it, and beautiful scenery as well. And if you're fortunate, good fish.
Wonderful. And tell me, when you're fishing, you talked about topping up the reservoirs, and I'm sure this will resonate with many people because I know when it works for me. Can you feel when you're there, when that topping up process has happened, and it's almost like you feel like you've got a half tank or even a full tank again to get going again? Can you sometimes sense those moments? Because I know myself that I often can.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I can. And I think it sometimes used to be about related to the success of the day. Perhaps in my early days, feeling successful, catching fish, feeling clever, deceiving fish. But now it's more about, I just noticed that my head clears and all I'm thinking about is what's going on around me. I remember talking to another colleague who said, I fish too, Dave. He said, it's where I do all my best strategic thinking. And I said to him, I don't do any strategic thinking in the river. That's the last thing I want to do. But it's horses for courses, isn't it? And I think when I think of the way I used to fish it, when I first started fishing the Monnow, 2005, it was all about exploring what the river had to offer, finding out what lived in there. So I would nymph regularly, duo, single nymph, Euro nymph, a little bit of dry fly, but it was about exploring every nook and cranny, and seeing what it had to offer. And it does have some not extraordinarily large fish that you perhaps associate with some of the South Wales rivers or the northern rivers, but it holds good fish, some good surprises. And the fish are beautiful as well. But the way I like to fish these days is I'm a sit, watch and wait man, and I'll take a dry fly rod and that's it, unless I'm after a grayling in the autumn. But I very much a sit, watch and wait. I'll walk. Sometimes I might only make 4 or 5 casts in a session, and that's fine, But I feel that sense of switch off because I'm concentrating, I'm watching. My senses are tuned into what's going on around me in and around the river, and I'm concentrating on that. So yeah, you feel the sense of being recharged and re-energized, or your reservoirs being topped up, and you come home and you reflect on it. So yeah, it still has it always has the ability to do that. Interestingly, and again, this might sound a bit overly philosophical. I probably had my most challenging season on the Monnow this year, and I put a post up on social media. I'm not a huge social media animal, but I like to post the occasional fish pic or a cake that I've baked or a whiskey that I've drunk or whatever. And it's been a really difficult year for us personally as a family, and I've kind of felt I needed a lift from the river. So I've gone looking for the special fish or the special moment, and it hasn't quite happened. And there's an interesting lesson in that as well, is that, as an angler, you can do your best, you can prepare, but actually, if it ain't going to happen, it ain't going to happen. If the fish aren't feeding, if the conditions are poor, which, that they have been recently, you just got to go out and enjoy it for what it is, which is a walk somewhere wonderful, and take what you can from that, rather than trying to force the moment, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And it does make me worry sometimes, and I talk about it, that people worry too much about likes and things like that rather than that experience. And I don't know if it is maturity or hours that you fished or years that you fished that make you look at things differently. And, I know I was fishing with my friend John, who designs the magazine for us, just last Sunday. And he said basically it was some fishing built around lunch. And we sort of sat in some chat waiting for a fish to rise, putting the world to rights, talking about things, enjoying each other's company, and making a few casts and catching a few fish. He fished spectacularly well, I have to say, and caught some fish. And it seems as though you can look at things that way without having to worry about the pressure of, well, I've got to post this because people might not think I'm not catching a fish anymore. Or it doesn't matter, does it? Those things in the grand scheme, and it harks back to exactly what you said about enjoy every moment. You can enjoy that moment on your own sometimes, and you don't have to share it with the rest of the world. And I know I do that myself. There's a lot I don't post, and I post if I've got something to do it. But sometimes that moment between you and the fish, that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't feel the pressure to catch fish, or to post pictures with. I don't want to sound critical, but it's numerous hashtags underneath it. Actually, the purpose of to go fishing is the aesthetic, and it's the well-being, and if I'm fishing with a friend, it's exactly what you described. Sit there, have a bit of lunch by the river, chat, shoot the breeze, and get what you can out of the day. And I think as you mature as an angler, you're much more in tune with actually what the day is going to have to offer you. And a late August day with a low clear river and bright sunshine isn't going to offer you the same as late April with good cloud cover, no wind, and a nice hatch of large brook duns, is it? That's just it's not going to be the same experience. So yeah.
Absolutely. And you talked about it being a challenging season. And I'm guessing many listeners are probably feeling the same too, that, May was pretty shitty and cold as well from a, looking for fish perspective as well. And that's made it challenging. And then, I had a few nights ago, I went down in the evening, and it's amazing how those evenings are closing in now, aren't they? And we were hoping that we'd find some rising fish, and it's been challenging for all sorts of different reasons. And then, of course, we've had too much water as well, haven't we, in parts of the season too?
Yeah, exactly. And it's been one of those seasons where the conditions have never quite been spot on. I mean, the early part of the season on the Monnow, for about the first 2 months, the river was not at a fishable level, and then the temperatures drop and you get east winds, and it doesn't quite coincide with when you're available. So yeah, and you just have to swallow that and change tack. I mean, I found that now my fishing season in the last few years has been kind of compressed to that sort of mid-spring, early summer. So mid-April, all right, I'll have a few brave jaunts in March, looking for the LDOs or the MBs. But most of my efforts in the last few years have been around the sort of April, May, early June. Whereas when I first started fishing, certainly the Monnow, fished all the way through. You could have fairly consistent sport during the summer. You just adjust your tactics. So I think it's a combination of the change in weather patterns, the river levels, the extraction. All of these things have served to just challenge us, I think, as anglers, as to when the conditions are supportive for us. I mean, one of the things I've done over the last couple of seasons is for the sort of mid-late summer, I started fishing the wild lakes, the wild llynns of Wales, which has provided a really nice alternative. and a different style of fishing. And that's something I can see myself doing more of in the future, just so I have that kind of extended season, really.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see. One of the next question I was about to ask you actually was, do you think the changing climate will make us look differently at how and what we target fish-wise now? Because, we're seeing this, and I'm sure you were aware of when carp, I know it's been going on for many, many years, but we had that first little mini boom of carp and, of course, what the guys are doing with mullet and bass and everything else. Do you think we're going to continue to see that if we get these, we're sitting here talking and the sun's coming out and we're probably going to have 23, 24, 25. Yeah. Our water temperature, the Tamar, is close to 70 degrees, so I'm not fishing right now. And so do you think that means that we're going to start looking at these things even more widely and the growth in these areas is going to continue?
Absolutely. I think that is going to be the case. I mean, for the last 4 years or so, I've carried a thermometer around with me when I've gone fishing, and I never would have done that 15 years ago or so. So, if you want to enjoy your sport, you've got to think about broadening your horizons, haven't you? And I have to say, saltwater fly fishing is something I've always fancied having a serious crack at, but never really. I've attempted it, full of enthusiasm, and then found it quite demoralising after an hour or so, where you're looking at the sea and thinking, "Gosh, this is an awfully big place. they could be anywhere," So, but that's for me. It's that sort of shortening of the trout fishing season, if you like, to that sort of spring, early summer window, has taken me to the mountains of mid and North Wales. So, others fly fishing for coarse species, fly fishing for barbels becoming a thing as well. It's been a thing for a while, hasn't it? But more and more people doing that. And I think it's each to their own. My background is as a coarse fisherman originally. Interestingly, a friend of mine invited me tench fishing for the first time in 30 years back in early July. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I couldn't see myself crossing codes completely. But I had a similar excitement of going out early morning and catching a couple of large tench. It's not fly fishing, though.
No, I think it would take a little bit to grab a fly rod out of my hand. But do you find then, as time marches on and we all get a year older, that because you're compressing that season, does that mean that calendar seems to go even more quickly than it seemed to used to?
Yeah, it does. And over the last, I suppose, 4 or 5 years for me, I've changed my fishing habits a little bit in that this is probably down to social media, but I've wanted to set myself the goal to try and catch large wild brown trout, 3+, 4+, and they're quite rare. Well, it's very, very rare that you get a 3-pound fish on the River Monnow. The sort of local law is that it's known as a raspberry. It has to be a 20-inch fish, and it's known as a raspberry because you have to be a jammy bastard to catch one. And I think the number of people who've caught a raspberry, you can count on the finger of one hand. I've caught 3-pound plus fish, but none of them have been two 3-pound plus fish on the Monnow, but none of them have been over 20 inches. So I have a good fly fishing friend, Matt Eastham, and I've fished some of the northern rivers, the Cumbrian rivers, with him. And I remember him saying, "Dave, if you want to catch big fish, you need to fish rivers where they live." And they do live in those rivers, more of them than they do down here. So kind of madness, really. I joined a club up in Cumbria to provide myself with the opportunity to go and have a go for them. And I've been doing that for the past 4 years now. And again, I go up there sort of April, May time with a friend. We call it our annual Grim Northern Jaunt. So it's 4 or 5 days up in Cumbria, and it's as much about the sort of camaraderie and the scotch and the wine as it is about the fishing. But we always go dry fly fishing for large, tricky trout, and sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But you know that those rivers provide that opportunity for you. And last year I went up and had a successful trip, and in one day I caught 4 fish, all over £3. The biggest was 4.5, and it's like, I could never get a day like that locally. How am I going to be able to look at the Monnow again after a day like that? Anyway, I wandered out onto the Monnow, and it was just coming into mayfly, and I caught the £3 6-ounce fish. And it's almost like the river saying to me, "You see, we can do it too. You just have to look for us." So yeah, fishing habits change, and I've not been able to spend as much time, or I've not spent as much time, perhaps, exploring the Monnow system in the last couple of years as I have done previously. But it's the place that I will always go back to. For obvious reasons.
That's a lovely story. And I was about to say to you, well, first I'll say Matt Easton, friend of the podcast, wrote a beautiful piece for Fly Culture about how the stream, when he very sadly lost his mother, helped him as well through an incredibly difficult time. And I'm sort of kind of with you in that there's people like Matt and of course Paul Proctor who needs no introduction in the skill. I think he is probably the master at catching sizable fish, and we've had him on here a number of times, and he's the man as far as I'm concerned. I'd still, the contrarian in me would rather still catch the raspberry, and it's similar for me. It sounds as though the Monnow and my river where I fish on the tour are very, very similar, and I spend my time looking for those raspberries, not because I want to catch that great big fish. I like the challenge of waiting to see if that's a big fish rising, and I think I've taken myself away from that a little bit because I don't even weigh them now. And I caught a fish the other day that I think was probably close to £3, which for the West Country is a huge fish. And I've caught, a few twos this year as well, but I don't weigh them anymore. And that to me sort of, I think, means that I'm sort of looking at them, but not looking in them in quite that way. So I don't, I admire the beauty of them, get a photograph, don't weigh it, and off it goes again. And that's it. And it's the raspberries. I'm going to nick that phrase now because I love it. And that sums that up. And you hit the nail on the head perfectly, didn't you? That you're going to catch big fish where there's big fish. So if you go to Iceland, you'll catch big fish where there's there. And so those ones, yes. And I'm sure if I fished some of those Cumbrian rivers, I know I'd love every second of it. And some of them a bit further up the line I've fished and loved every second. But it's still that raspberry on your home river that makes it special, and that's pulling those out. That's the dream, isn't it? And that's what makes us love them so much, I think.
That's the grail for me, but you've got to be careful that you manage things, because I remember catching a 19.5-inch fish, and I measured it. I have a rod rule on the side of my fishing rods for the purpose of raspberry verification should the incident ever occur. And this fish, it was a strange occurrence. I spotted it rising in the upper river, and it's strange. The upper river does produce the bigger fish for me. In shallow, clear water, barely enough to cover its back, and I spotted this fish moving. I thought that's a really good fish. And that sort of moment when your hand goes to jelly and you're trying to wade like you're burgling a house so that you don't disturb this thing feeding. Got into position, first cast, over its nose, had it, hooked in, gone. The sense of disappointment. wandered off downstream, came back an hour and a half later. This fish is back on it. It's meant to be. This is your raspberry moment, Dave. Cast again, had it, hooked it, fought, stuck, and netted this thing. And I was shaking with excitement because I was convinced it was a raspberry. Put it next to the ruler, and it was 19.5 inches long. And I felt this kind of sense of disappointment, And then it wasn't until later when I was driving home and, talking with a friend over it. He said, what the hell are you feeling so disappointed? 19.5-inch fish is a wonderful, wonderful fish anywhere. And I thought, so you've got to keep that perspective, haven't you? And just because it was half an inch shy of being a raspberry, it was still a fantastic fish to catch. And you've got to be careful that you don't over obsess about these things. Otherwise, you'll lose the raison d'etre of going fishing in the first place, which was just to chill and enjoy yourself and refill those reservoirs. Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And I think that's probably why I don't bother weighing them or anything like that now. And I appreciate every one for its beauty. If it's 8 inches or 20 inches or whatever size it is, they're all beautiful. I don't know, after you caught that 19.5-inch fish, did you snip off and go home, or did you carry on fishing? That was it for me. It was kind of towards the end of the day, and I knew that it wasn't going to get any better, and I'm quite good at disciplining myself, to knowing when it's time to pack up now. Knowing when I've had it, knowing when I've got what I want from the day. 15, 16 years ago, when it was all new and fresh to me again, I would be a fishing monster, start early in the morning, take sandwiches, lunch, supper, and I would fish through till as long as daylight would allow it. But I'm a little bit more choosy and judicious about that now. I don't fish hard, I fish selectively, and if I've had enough, I've had enough. Don't flog a dead horse.
That's a nice way to look at it. And does that mean that you do fish a fair bit? Does that time allow you to actually do that?
Yeah, I mean, ordinarily, I get out 2 or 3 times a week. This year's been slightly different because we've had family bereavements, which have taken my life in a different direction. But normally 2 or 3 times a week. So evenings, once late spring, early summer arrives, I'm lucky enough that I work for myself. So I will manage my workload so that I front load my, I work a certain number of days a year, and I'll try and get as many of those done in the autumn and the winter so that I leave some flexibility for the spring and the summer as well. So I'm quite fortunate. My wife's very understanding about my fishing. She knows the important role it plays in my well-being as well. But it's a funny thing. There's a sort of balance between fishing solitarily, to go out on your own, and that's really when I'm the kind of raspberry moment. I'm out there in sort of hunting mode almost, and that, or they'll be going with a fishing friend, which is a different. To me, that's a different experience. It's sociable. You're there to catch up and enjoy the crack and the banter together, which is something that I also really like about fishing, and through finding the Monnow and hooking up with other anglers, that's something it's given me. I've got lifelong friends through that, thankfully.
Lovely. And funnily enough, I was talking to my friend Jimmy the other day, and he was talking about, he's got his tying planned for the winter, and so how he gets his fly boxes sorted out and everything else. not work-wise, though. I think that's almost the equivalent of winter fly tying, is getting all your work sorted out so that you can get into fishing. So you have my utmost respect for that. And also, funnily enough, I've only fished the Monnow once, and that was with Jimmy. And we caught some grayling. We fished that beat. It was only on the passport scheme by the recording studios, and we caught we caught some grayling along there, which was great fun, and we really enjoyed. And yeah, it's a wonderful stream from the little I've seen of it. I've won 2 lots in the famous Monnow Rivers auction, which I never took, which I'm kicking myself about. But you've sold it absolutely wonderfully to me, and we've talked about this wonderful river, how much you love it, how much you love to fish it. But have you had, and we've talked about this wonderful 19.5, almost a raspberry fish, but have you had one of those days where everything doesn't go to plan, or something doesn't go to plan, and you've had some form of a fishing train wreck?
A fishing train wreck, yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I have. I've had lots of fishing train wrecks over my time, but I think probably the one is from last season, actually, and it was on the Monnow, and I've been fishing most of the day fruitlessly, and I got quite tired, and I was fishing a CDC and elk pattern, which is usually quite a nice searching pattern on the Monnow. It will bring them up if there's nothing rising. So size 14, and it had been quite a dispiriting day. And I was wading across the river, and I stumbled, and I dumped my glass. My glasses just fell off, straight into fast, deep water. Gone. That's it. So I'm sat on the bank. Now what am I going to do? And as I'm sat there, having a sandwich, there's a hatch of flying ants. Okay. 1 or 2 fish start to come up and pick them off. And within about 20 minutes, there's fish porpoising everywhere, big ones too. And I put my CDC and elk over them. Absolutely not interested at all. They're just fixed on these little ants. And I look in my fly box. Of course, I've got some size 18 APT ant type pattern in there. Trying to tie this ant pattern on for about half an hour, right, unsuccessfully. The air is blue with expletives, and these fish are still rising everywhere around me. And eventually, about 45 minutes later, I've got this thing tied on, and it's like someone's turned the light out, and this gone down. So yeah, that was a bit of a train wreck, really. So I've learnt my lesson about glasses now, and I carry some magnifiers with me. Yeah, so that's not really a car crash, is it? But it was just that frustration. All these fish rising around me, some big ones too, and just nothing I could do about it. They were not going to have the CDC and elk for love nor money.
I love that. That's great. And you get to that stage, and I'm just on the cusp of needing glasses and I have a pair in the front of my waders. But anyone who's been fishing with me will know that I threaded that size 20 without glasses, and you could probably hear that down the river somewhere. And even late in the evening, a little while back with my friend Perry, that I managed to thread one through, and I'm just over the moon that I've managed to do that. But that I don't know if it's a train wreck. That sounds to me like some form of torture from some power on high.
Yes, yeah. Somebody had decided it wasn't my it wasn't my day, and I needed punishing for something, clearly. But yeah, I in terms of other train wrecks, they're more sort of Schadenfreude moments, really. Sort of just the sort of moments of regret. But some interesting ones over the years. One other incident that sticks in my mind, it's not a train wreck, but a bad experience. A few years ago, I was over in Iceland with Nicholas Steedman and John Applin. And it was the first night we got there. We're travelling all day to the Highlands in Iceland. And Nicholas had arranged this trip, and we were staying at this sort of remote farm complex. And we got there about 10 o'clock in the evening. Of course, it's still broad daylight. We're all absolutely famished, hungry. And we hope they're still serving food. We get into the restaurant area of this farmstead, and there's this sort of strapping 6'4" Viking chef come waiter, and he said, "Yeah, we've got some food." He said, "We've got lamb stew, or we've got smoked lamb." Oh. The smoked lambs are our local specialty. So John and I are like, "Oh, yeah, we'll have a bit of that. Yeah, that sounds lovely." Nicholas is, "Yeah, I'll just go with the lamb stew, thank you." Anyway, 15 minutes later, our meals come out, and Nicholas's lamb stew looks absolutely fantastic. Smoked lamb, we weren't quite sure what to expect. So John and I get served a white plate with about 12 slices of livid purple, sort of cold meat, with a kind of bright green, fluorescent green pickle next to it. And this big Viking guy is sort of stood by us watching us. "Oh, this looks interesting." So both John and I put our fork in this stuff about the same time and lifted it towards our mouth, and sort of recoiled with horror. It got about a foot away from our nose. And, we try not to offend this bloke for obvious reasons. And it smelled like shit, We're thinking, what the hell is this? And this bloke saying to us, "Taste it, it's good," So I start shoveling this stuff down. John just decides, no, it's not for him. And I thought, well, I'm going to take one for the team here, and smile pleasantly. Polished it all off, and he goes, "Oh, you must have some more." And I said, "No, couldn't eat another thing." I said, "But just for a matter of interest," I said, "What do what's the lamb smoked over? How have you prepared it?" And he said, "Oh, well, we take the lamb," and he said, "we smoke it over the excrement of the mother sheep for 6 months in the hole in the ground or something outside." So, so John and I were sort of fishing the next day with slightly twitchy stomachs after that.
I've heard the term shit sandwich, but yeah, that's a whole new level. Yeah. So I did mention their beauties, and thank you for those. I did mention the Monnow Rivers Association. It should be the work that they do on the river, and I know that you've been historically involved with it. They do some great work. They have a great auction, don't they? And a social that is well attended. Yeah. And I know John, another friend of the podcast, goes along to that too. And they're great events, and you have worked hard on highlighting the issues that rivers have to face. And am I right in thinking that you guys were first really to get stuck into Himalayan balsam and tackling that project?
Yeah. And I can tentatively say, we're probably the first balsam free catchment. I've got some figures which your listeners might be interested in. So, I mean, balsam became a huge problem in the sort of early mid-noughties. It was something that seemed to grow and mushroom almost overnight, and we felt swamped by it. And what to do, and really the program was the brainchild of Patrick Lloyd and Robert Denny, who were they're the guys that have put so many hours and given so selflessly of their time to the river over the years, and it was kind of their passion for it that helped to hook me into it as well, really. But with the balsam, started back in 2009, doing 40 hours of spray and pull. And since then, almost 15,000 man-hours have been spent spray and pull, right throughout the catchment. So they started at the highest point of the catchment, identified it, and then worked their way down over the years. And so there's probably about £170,000 worth of chemicals and equipment over that time. 350 hours per annum spent spraying and pulling on average now. And it's largely balsam free. It's tremendous effort, but that's principally being funded by the annual auction, which we usually have either just before or just after the wild trout auction sometime in the spring. And the Monnow Social, of course, which has sort of achieved legendary status over the years for those in the know. The annual auction is a fantastic event to support because the Monnow isn't an easy system to get on. Most of it is controlled by syndicates and clubs. There are day ticket beats, and you mentioned the one at Rockfield that's available through the YUSC Foundation, and you can access some of the upper beats through the passport scheme. But what tends to happen is all of the syndicated beats and the private beats that are very, very lightly fished and you just can't get onto, you can buy a day for not huge, it's not big money, maybe 50 quid, 75 quid at a push will get you access to a beat that doesn't get fished, and is a cracking piece of water. And all of that money goes into the sort of going native work, which is about trapping out, pulling out invasive species and supporting the natives. So, over the years, I mean, it's not a huge amount of money each year. It doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, but the auction will raise around £5,000 each year. And then the social, there'll be 20 odd people will come and camp on from a Friday night through to a Sunday up in Longtown, which is a beautiful little village, hamlet really, in the shadow of the Black Hill. They'll get their supper on a Friday night, breakfast on a Saturday morning, a steak supper on a Saturday night, breakfast on a Sunday morning, and access to fishing across the catchment again in some of those private beats. I've not been able to go for the last couple of years, but I think the cost's still pretty much the same, around 150 quid for a weekend's fishing and breakfast and a meal. And we do another auction as well on that occasion, a drunken auction on the Saturday night, which is always quite an occasion. You've only got to twitch, and you will you'll end up being stung for 100 quid or something. There's a great story. One of my friends who I fish with regularly, Morgan, a few years back, he lost his shoes in dubious circumstances during the weekend, and they turned up. They were found on the banks of the River Dore, which is one of the Monnow tributaries, and he ended up having to buy them back 2 years later at the auction. So it can be a brutal experience, but it's raised a lot of good money. That money goes directly into man hours, chemicals, equipment, which benefits the river, and the catchment, as I say, is pretty much balsam free. I mean, you perhaps pull up a handful of plants each year, but nothing like the thousands and thousands that there once were. I mean, balsam spreads like twitch, doesn't it? So Patrick and Rob and the people who do the pulling, they keep a very watchful eye on it, and you'll be pushed to see a balsam plant in the catchment now. Certainly anywhere above Rockfield. Yeah. But I think back to the auction and the sort of raison d'etre behind the Monnow Rivers Association. What I liked about it, the ethos when I got involved, was about opening the river up to visiting anglers. It wasn't about exclusivity. We've got something special here, let's keep it to ourselves. The ethos of the MRA was to work in, when I was more involved was to work, with the farmers and the landowners, and perhaps open up the fishing. So perhaps the riparian owners would see a value in the fishing and see a value in looking after the river, because people come up for a week's fishing with the family. They're going to put some money into the local economy. Maybe the family might go off walking, pub lunches, pony trekking, buying local produce, etc. So the whole vision and ethos really of trying to sort of make the Monnow, the Monnow Valley, the Monnow catchment, a destination for people, and see that fishing, for those who aren't fishermen, and the farming fraternity, to see a value in looking after the river, because it would bring money into the area. I mean, it's perhaps a bit lofty in terms of an ambition, but I think the principle of it is really sound.
I think that's a beautiful idea, and creating a community within fishing and beyond that to improve the background, I think, is a wonderful thing to do, and I can only applaud that. We've been talking over an hour now, and I was going to end with asking you that you have one more day to fish. I know where the answer will be, so we'll take that as a given, where you'd want to be. But where is your dream destination? Where is the place that you would go away from the Monnow that you would love to go cast a fly?
That's a tough question. I mean, there's all the obvious ones, I suppose. I'd like to go back to Iceland, not just for the sort of prehistoric brown trout there, but the people and the place. I've never visited New Zealand, and that's something I've been drawn to. Ditto Patagonia, but this is a bit left field.
Good.
The place I would really love to go is Labrador. I saw some aged footage. I think it was Lee Wolf float planing in to some interconnected, river-connected lakes, fishing for large brook trout, and that is something I would really love to do. Those volcanically coloured brook trout are incredible things, aren't they? So, yeah, that will be my dream destination. There's a bit of midnight sun, the moose, the northern divers calling, and the idea of twitching a mouse pattern across, across a lake surface or a creek, with the idea that it could be snaffled by one of those 5 or 6 pound brookies would be. That's something I would love to do, maybe one.
That sounds a great choice, and I've got a video actually. I think it's Gary Borger going to Labrador and catching great big brook trout. And I'm going to go and see if I can find it after we've been speaking. All I've got to do now is find a video player, and then I can watch it again and see it. But I like that. Left field's really cool as far as I'm concerned, and something completely different. So great choice. Thank you for that. Thank you for talking with me as well. I've really enjoyed it. And it just goes to show, and I'm sure listeners, it's a beautiful story. And, it's often said, how fishing helps us, and it helps us all, but this is absolute proof of it as well. So, Dave, it's been wonderful to catch up with you. It's been wonderful to hear about what the Monnow means to you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Pete. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope we get to fish together, perhaps in the not too distant future.
That sounds absolutely perfect. I'd love to very much indeed. One last thing I should ask as well, your social media handles and bits and pieces like that, how can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, at Monnow Riverman on Instagram and Twitter. I've moved away from Twitter a little because it just feels aggressive and unpleasant. So I hang out mostly on Instagram these days, but I might be looking at Threads. But it's at Monnow Riverman, all one word. And if anyone wants to email me into looking for information around the River Monnow, details of things like the auction or the social, it's just at Monnow River. It's monnowriverman@gmail.com. I'm always happy to help visiting anglers. I get a lot of pleasure out of that.
That sounds absolutely perfect. Dave, it's been wonderful to talk with you. We'll catch up soon. But listeners, I'm sure you're going to be like me, that you're going to be looking out for those raspberries on at Monnow Riverman's Instagram feed. Dave, it's been brilliant to catch up. Speak with you soon.
Thank you. Cheers, Pete.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As ever, there'll never be any charge for these. They'll always be free. I just love talking about fly fishing with people. And as ever, there will be plenty more coming very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.